I'm here again today with Jeremy, and we had such a great conversation last time about Jeremy's um, conversion to Eastern Orthodoxy and his entry into the church. And during our conversation, we had gotten onto the subject of death and how death used to be treated quite differently in our civilization, and now it's something that we we fear talking about, and we tend to hide it away in boxes somewhere so we don't have to face the reality of it. And so I thought it'd be interesting to approach it from the standpoint of this idea of memento mori, which is a saying that comes out of classical antiquity: remember death. And as I understand it, in Plato's Phaedo, or Phaedo, where he's relating one of Socrates' um, talks, Socrates introduced the idea that the proper practice of philosophy is about nothing else but dying and death.
Mm.
So, and I know a lot of Stoics that are writing nowadays write about the importance of keeping death always before us as something that we remember, because it changes the way we live our lives. If we think about death as being potential at any moment, then it's going to change the way we live our lives. Um, but a lot of people would think that that is morbid and dark, and that would put you in a very dark place. And yet, I think um, that's not necessarily so, especially when we think about the deaths of those that have gone before, and we think about that verse in scripture in Hebrews 12, that we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses that we should lay off every sin that entangles, because they're cheering us on. As
Mhm.
one Bible teacher said many, many years ago, those are the balcony people. They're cheering us on.
Mhm.
We're out in the arena, and they are cheering us on. So I
Mhm.
thought it might make an interesting topic of conversation, because your father recently passed away, and
Yeah.
my father passed away through a particular chain of events in the way that the Lord dealt with him in the last months of his life. And I thought it would just be very interesting to talk about all those things. So,
That sounds great. Thanks for having me back. I'm glad that I didn't burn a bridge by speaking so directly last time. I forget how, like, I get used to just talking to my friends, and I forget how sensitive some topics are. And I generally speak pretty freely anyway. And so thank you for your patience and your grace in
I
dealing with my
I like
uh,
free speech. I like free
craziness.
speech. I'm very much in favor of free speech. So I have no problem with that. But
Well, thank you.
so have you ever heard this phrase before, memento mori?
Yes, my dad, speaking, we'll just tie those together right off the bat. My dad definitely, well, he would frequently say to me, today's a good day to die. And that's the way he saw his life. He lived his life in such a way that he would push to try to um, extract as much as he could from every day. He was always very grateful. He had a problem with being late to work, and I would ask him, Dad, how come you're late to work again? And he goes, well, I stopped to watch the sunrise. It was too beautiful. I couldn't I I
Hmm.
I just couldn't ignore it, and that happened more than once. We worked together for about 3 years, and anyway, just he really held on to that concept very dearly and lived his life in such a way that he was always aware. Like, I remember when he turned 50, he was just like, I never thought I would see 50. I don't know what to do, And then when he hit 60, he said the same thing. I'm like, well, I really wasn't planning on this, because he lived a very hard and fast life. And because of that, he was grateful for every day. He said he woke up and thanked God every day for another day. So I try
Hmm.
to I try to carry on that tradition. That's my first prayer in the morning, is just I know not everyone survived the night, and I thank God that I can have another day to repent and to learn to love him more. And I pray that he will teach me how to open my heart more to his love.
Hmm.
So, and I took that right from my dad.
That's really, really, that's really meaningful. Um, I had just a very different experience growing up, I guess, because I grew up in a, I guess what you'd call a dysfunctional household.
Oh,
But
we had that.
yeah.
Don't get me wrong. We it was crazy. My dad died of alcohol poisoning, basically. Like he had an ulcer, and he bled internally and died very rapidly. And it was,
Oh,
and he had liver problems, and so, I mean, I I pray for him every day, but he definitely struggled. I mean, he drank, a fifth of vodka every day for the end of his life.
well, we have that in common.
So yeah.
My dad did stop drinking maybe 6 months before he died,
Mm,
um, because his health had started getting so bad, and I think that
hmm.
he just knew that if he didn't stop, he would die right then, But
Yeah.
but both of my parents, they both had some very great qualities. So I'm not saying that they didn't have great qualities, but
Yeah.
neither
The
one
same.
of them had any um, what I would call enthusiasm for life.
Oh,
Life
I
just
see.
sort of life just sort of happened. You just
Yeah.
sort of fell into things, and then you did what you could with what you fell into. And
Yeah.
so I thought that's the way people did life. So that's the way I did life for many, many years of my life. Just and thankfully I fell into some very interesting things, but I never understood anything about delayed gratification or about making goals or about sacrificing the present for the future. I had no understanding of any of those things. So yes, your dad and I were both alcohol. Your dad and my dad were both alcoholics, but your dad seemed to really enjoy every day.
Yes, he
So
did that.
so for him,
But that
maybe
was that was his fault. Is that he also didn't know anything about, or little about, delayed gratification, or plans for the future,
mhm.
because he was so in the moment focused, if that makes sense.
Well,
So
I was listening to a talk show today. I think it's some sort of counseling talk show or something. And they were commenting on addiction.
mm,
And apparently there's some guy who says that addiction is a function of a wrong framing.
mm,
And
okay.
and what happens is people lose the idea that life is meant we are meant to be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy in the next. And they get that turned around and they think, I need to be supremely happy in this life. And so alcohol or drugs or something else will give them that counterfeit high that makes them think, I could have this all the time
Mm,
and this would make my life better,
hmm.
rather than facing the difficulties of life without the alcohol and having a reasonably happy life. They're opting for what they think is going to give them the really happy life, because when they're drinking, they can be really happy, this
Hmm.
false euphoria.
Mm.
And
I don't know if I
that made
would.
a lot of sense to me.
It doesn't to me, because my experience with my father, and we talked about this a lot of times, and for him it was not the euphoria. It was more, it was an analgesic for a very deep and devastating pain
Hmm.
that he didn't know how to resolve. And he
Yeah.
he told me it was, he said, if I don't drink, I can't sleep. And it's the voices in his head. And he grew up in a very abusive environment. His dad had PTSD from the Korean War and took it out on my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, he had a lot of trauma, and those voices of yelling, and you're not good enough, and you're terrible, and you're a horrible person, would replay in his mind, and he would remember all of the things that he had done that he was ashamed of or that he regretted, and replay them over and over.
Mm, mhm,
And he couldn't stop. It was compulsive. And the alcohol was the only way that he could dim those voices and dim those memories
mhm.
enough to find peace or find rest.
It's
So I don't know.
so wonderful that you could talk to your dad about that, that he felt safe enough with you that he could open up about those things.
Yes, I agree. We did get very close. We worked together every day for, well, I lived with him, and then we would ride together to work, for about a year, and then I moved to the town where he was living, and we worked together at the same job, and we became very close at that time. And then toward the end of his life, I was working in Seattle for my sister, and I was living in an apartment that my sister owned, and my dad came up there, and we lived together again. And my family wasn't there. They were still in Utah, so I had time. We just had time to just sit on the back porch and drink some vodka and smoke a
Mhm,
cigar. And these are the things that he would
mm,
share. So yeah, it was, and some of it was me sharing some of my challenges as well. And I think that helped him feel comfortable opening up to me,
mhm,
because we shared a lot of the same struggles. I
mhm,
didn't use alcohol. I can drink a glass of scotch and not drink another glass of scotch for 3 months, and I don't notice it.
mhm,
And he couldn't. I mean, there were times where he would go for a week or two without drinking, but that was about as far as he would go.
mhm.
So I had my own ways of coping with my own trauma, but it wasn't alcohol. Thank God.
Yeah, so I think that's probably part of what my dad experienced too, because he was in the Second World War and he was
Mm.
there when they went through the concentration camps right at the end.
Oh,
And he never would talk about any of that, but I'm
mm.
guessing that that affected him
Yeah.
because, yeah, I'm guessing that that affected him because I think my mom had a better relationship with him before he went to the war, and then after he came back, things were not so great. And
Yeah. That happens.
yeah, and I think alcohol certainly was an analgesic like that. You know, just maybe
Yeah.
not to shut out the voices. I'm not sure he ever had the voices of that kind of thing, but
Probably the
shut out
visions.
their memories and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's awful.
And I think the
Oh.
inability when I think some of the men that are in the war feel what do they call that? It's a it has an actual term that they survived and their buddies didn't survive. So they have a
Yes.
lot of regret over that sense of,
Yes.
you know, I'm not making enough of my life, even though I survived. And so there's this all this regret. My dad was just one big bundle of regrets,
Yeah.
but the alcohol kept him from ever doing anything about it. You know, he
Yes.
couldn't rise up out of it and accomplish what might have been possible for him. Because
Yeah.
my dad was a brilliant man, just a brilliant man. He had
Yeah.
such a great mind and
Mm.
he was constantly reading and he would read and listen to the radio and watch TV all at the same time.
That's funny.
And he would know everything that was going on in all those things. And he was,
Yeah.
you know, he could comment on them.
Wow.
But in his own life, he just couldn't seem to, you know, he always sort of made it. He got enough to keep going, but
Mhm.
not what he could have been.
Yeah. I think my dad experienced he was terrified of responsibility because he didn't want to be considered an asshole. And sometimes when you're the boss, you have to, reprimand people or correct things or keep things going smoothly.
Mhm,
And he was just always very uncomfortable with that. And so he would avoid any kind of role. He was, he was very capable. And when he walked on the job, he was generally the most experienced person on the job. But he had no interest in, I mean, he made a few attempts at running crews and he just hated it. He's like,
mhm,
I spent my whole life learning how to be the best welder, only so that they could take me away from that and put me in charge of people who are terrible at welding. And he's like, it's torture. I hate it. Because like now I have to be responsible for their poor performance. And I
Isn't
know
that
we
the
could get twice
reverse?
as done, if it was me. So
Isn't that the reverse of the Peter principle? Was it the Peter? Was it the Peter principle that says that you rise to the level of your incompetence?
yes, but I think he was trying to avoid that and stay
Yeah,
where he was comfortable and competent.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he was a he, and he lived in or he worked in an environment or in an industry where you're always working yourself out of a job. He's a pipeline welder, so as soon as the pipeline's done, you have to find a new job. So
Mhm,
he didn't really find a long-term role with any company for his whole career. I mean, I
mm,
think the longest he ever worked for one company was like 2 years,
mm.
and that's just how long the job lasted.
So were
So
you with him when he died, Jeremy?
yes, yeah, yeah,
Would
yeah,
you want to talk about that or?
yeah, yeah. He so there was a woman who had done his laundry and was bringing his laundry over because he didn't have washer dryer in his little apartment, and so she brought the laundry over, and he was not really coherent. He wasn't able to answer her questions, and she got concerned, so she called 911. Ambulance came, they got him, and he had a heart attack in the ambulance and died, and they resuscitated him, but he never woke up again. They put him on, they put him on a ventilator. He couldn't breathe. Basically, they said 6 of his 7 systems all failed at the same time, or
Mm,
within a very short amount of time. So they kept him on the ventilator, and I was already on my way. And I live like 6 hours away from where he was, and so we all, my sister was already there, my brother was there, and then I had to drive. So this happened in the evening, and then the next morning I left early, and we got there around 10 or so, and we went in the hospital, and it was clear that there was no reason to just keep him on life support. There's no coming back from that. It's just
mhm,
there's too much damage. So
mhm,
we all decided, let's just take him off um,
mhm,
life life support, and we were all in unison with that. I was very grateful. We're all still very close, my siblings, and there was some discussion about whether we should just leave him or stay with him, after they pull the plug, because sometimes that can be a very unpleasant thing to have a memory of. Things don't always go smoothly right at the end. And I said, look, you can do what you need to do, and there's no judgment, because no one knows how to handle this situation. No,
mhm,
nothing can prepare you for this. But I feel, as his oldest son, a responsibility to be here with him, even if he doesn't know. I need to know that I was here with him when he passed.
mhm,
I don't
mhm,
want him to be alone.
mhm,
It would break my heart to know that I would feel like I had abandoned him. And I said, but like I said, that's just me. Please don't, just do whatever you need to do. And they both thought about it for a few minutes and talked about it and said, no, you're right. We should be here with him. And so we all just stayed in the room, and we were all, talking to him and holding his hand, and his breathing just got quieter and quieter, and then it stopped, and um, the machine starts doing its machine thing, beeping, and there was a nurse there with us as well, and she hugged all of us, and I said, I was praying the whole time, and that was that. It was very peaceful. It was very quiet. It was a very subtle transition, and that was it. Um, my,
So you didn't get a chance to say goodbye.
no, I didn't. Although I will say he called me 2 days before that,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a peculiar conversation. It was definitely a different tone. I think he knew, because the other thing that was really interesting is that my father didn't really care about personal hygiene much, and he didn't really keep a clean house. He just didn't care. And when we went to his, well, he was clean, and his beard was trimmed and his head was shaved. And when we went to his house was immaculate, and he had folded
Mm.
all of his laundry and put it away, and he had cleaned everything, and he had all of his dishes were clean, and all of his laundry. I mean, she had done his laundry, but everything was. His bed was made, which was very uncommon. So I believe he knew, and
Mm.
he called all of us separately and had a conversation with us like a couple of days before that. That was a meaningful, touching, deep conversation with each of his kids, and he sent us all a text, um, individually, that just said, "I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you."
Was that the first time he had ever said, I love you, Jeremy?
No, no, no.
Oh.
He was very forward about that. He would say that a lot, but I'm saying that was the last text that I got from him.
Mm-hmm.
And he would say that. No, he did not withhold that at all. He was very open with that. But it was significant because of the timing, you know.
He ended his life so well. That's just an amazing story. I mean,
Yeah,
the fact that he went through and tidied up his house and did all the dishes and made the bed and cleaned everything and got himself cleaned and ready. It almost sounds like there was some sort of a transformation, not just a premonition, but some sort of transformation that had taken place internally. I mean, I don't understand how you could go from being a person without that gene of, having the organizing, tidying gene,
yeah.
and to be um, a constant user of alcohol to hide the pain, and you could go from to be in that state. I don't understand you could be in that state and organize your house and clean your house and get yourself all ready. And it seems like something had to have happened in between the one and the other.
That very well could be.
That
And
maybe some window opened for him,
yes,
some window opened for him.
well, he had moments of, I mean, and not even moments. I would say days where he was a very insightful, and like your father, a very brilliant person. One time we had just gone ice fishing, and we were on our way back to town, and there was a little cafe there we stopped to eat at, and they had a box of the Trivial Pursuit cards on the table, and
Mhm.
it was the original edition. I call it the Boomer edition, right, of Trivial Pursuit.
The one I might still know the answer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The ones that, like, all the entertainment are about questions are about movies that were before my time. So that's why I call it the Boomer edition. So we just started pulling out cards and asking questions, and my dad would answer every one of them, and faster than anyone else at the table. And I knew he was smart, but it was just like, I had you know I had worked with him, and I'd seen some of the things that he knew at work, and he had learned trigonometry, and like he didn't graduate from high school just because of homework, and he got involved with alcohol when he was young.
Mhm.
But he was brilliant. He was very intelligent, very insightful, very sensitive, very aware of what was going on around him and the people who were around him, um, and very wise, but couldn't quiet the voices in his mind. So he was. What I'm trying to say is he had moments of being very lucid and very otherworldly wise. Where you
Mhm.
would talk to him, and he would say something. He would kind of turn everything upside down in such a way that you would see it from a completely different point of view, and it would kind of break free the little repetitive cycle that you would get in your head of, this but this but this. And he
Mm-hmm.
would say, well, what about this? And you're like, oh, it was like a log jam would break free. And
Mm-hmm.
that happened all the time. And it wasn't just me. I mean, this happened with a lot of his friends and a lot of people who were
Mm-hmm.
close to him. And so I think I think I think he was much more um, connected than you would expect from someone who also had a drinking problem. But like I said, for him, the drinking was to be able to sleep, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, you know, it it wasn't as distracting for him as it may be for other people. I don't think it was,
Mm-hmm.
because he would work through the day, but then when he got home, he
Yeah,
would
that
drink
was
until he
my
fell
dad,
asleep.
what
Yeah.
we call a 5 o'clock alcoholic, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, there were periods of time where it would take over and he would drink at work, but most of the time he wasn't like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I don't, I think you're right. I think he was very aware of what was happening. I think he was aware that things were about to come to an end. And he
Mm-hmm.
was comfortable with that. He was okay with that. He had lived his life in such a way that he wasn't hoping for more or begging for more. I think he was tired and ready, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, thank you for sharing that story, Jeremy.
you're welcome. Now, were you with your father when he passed?
Well, almost.
Mm,
Um, for me, the really so my dad had, I think I've talked before about my husband leaving me when I was in Japan,
mhm,
and I came back to the United States after realizing that we weren't going to be able to put it back together again because he had left me for a man, and I couldn't provide whatever it was he needed. And so eventually I came back to the States. And when I arrived at my parents' house, there was nobody there. So I just went to bed and I didn't know why nobody was there. And when I woke up in the morning, my dad came in and he said he was at the hospital with my mother the night before because she had gone into emergency surgery for cancer. And the doctors had said that she probably had 6 months to live. They couldn't do anything with the surgery.
mm,
And then shortly after that, something happened to my dad's heart that it started skipping beats. Maybe it
mm,
was from the stress of my mother's illness.
mm,
And then over time, his organs just started failing one after another.
mhm,
And so after about, so I went to work at the university, which was about 50 or 60 miles from their home. And after a couple of months, his health got so bad that he couldn't take care of my mom anymore.
mm,
So I set up a caregiver to be with my mom while I was at work, and then took my dad to the VA hospital, which was 60 miles in the other direction,
mm,
so that he would get care at the VA hospital. And shortly after he went into well, when he first went into the VA hospital, I put my arms around him and I said, Daddy, I know um, that you've done a good job of taking care of your financial affairs. You have everything in order. So if anything would happen to you, mom would be taken care of. So I know you've done a good job of that, but I'm wondering if your own future is in order. Do
mhm,
you know what would happen if you were to die? Do you know where you would go? And he said, You
mm,
know that I don't. And I said, Would you like me to talk with you about it? And he said, Nope. He just
mm,
shut the door. He didn't want to hear about it.
yeah.
He had been an atheist his whole life and very hostile to Christianity. And I had become a Christian about 9 years prior to that and had
Mm,
occasionally tried to share with him, and he wasn't at all open to hear anything about it. I
mm,
thought. I thought
mm,
he wasn't at all open. And But anyway, I was going back and forth from the VA hospital to where my mother was, and then to work at the university. And this went on
Mm.
for a number of weeks. And at a certain point in my dad's illness, something happened where all of a sudden he just became irrational, not lucid at all,
Mhm.
um, talking weird, nonsensical stuff. And the doctors at the VA hospital said, "Oh, he has Alzheimer's." And I said, "No, no, Alzheimer's doesn't do that.
Right.
You're not 1 week having a conversation and taking care of finances and working things out, and then the next week you have Alzheimer's." I said,
Right.
"That's
No.
not the way it goes."
No.
But they're doctors, and they didn't know him. He's in another town from where he lived, and they didn't know anything about him. But I happened to be good friends with a woman who was getting her degree in occupational therapy. And so she had a lot of medical books at her house. And I went and sat down with all these medical books and just read everything I could find about. I knew how to think about and research what was happening in his mind. And so I was looking at all that.
Mhm.
And I found something called, well, it was a dementia brought on by a kind of a misfire in the, what do you call it? Magnesium and potassium, the electrolytes.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
electrolytes were out of balance.
Mm.
And he had other symptoms that also looked like the electrolytes were out of balance, because he was gaining a lot of water in his legs and he was
Mm.
getting all puffy,
Mhm.
and the doctors had actually restricted him to a fourth of a cup of water a day. And yet he's taking like 20 pills every 3 hours with this fourth of a cup of water.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it was all backwards. It was just so backwards. But
Yeah.
anyway, I went to the doctors at the VA hospital and I said, he has this kind of dementia that's caused by an imbalance in electrolytes. Can you imagine? They're looking at me. What does she know? She's like
Yeah. I'm
32
sure
years
they
old.
were excited to hear that. Yeah. I'm sure they were
Yeah.
excited for your diagnosis.
Yeah.
I've run
But
into that before myself. So anyway, go ahead.
eventually I did get them to test his electrolytes, but not right away. So he's in this state where he's not lucid. He's not making any
Yeah.
sense at all. And so they had started tying him to the bed at night, because otherwise he would get up and he would try to wander around, but he's hooked up to an IV and he's hooked up
Yeah.
to all these wires and everything.
Yeah.
And so he'd get out of bed and then this wire would hang on to him and he'd trip and fall. And so they said, we have to tie him in because we don't want to be liable for him getting injured. So on the weekends, I would go to my mother's house and pick her up and bring her back to the VA hospital to spend the weekend with my dad. And she and I would
Mm.
stay in a motel in that town. And one weekend, we spent the day visiting with him on Saturday all day. And then I was going to take her back to the motel that night. And I said, Papa, I have to leave now because I got to take Mama to the hotel. She needs to get some rest before we come back tomorrow. But we'll be back in the morning. And I put my arms around him and I prayed for him. I don't even remember what the prayer was. Just, I think I told him something like, um, they have to tie you down. I know you hate it. He would fight against it. He was a big strapping chief warrant officer when he was in the military. And so he would just fight off this tying down and everything. And I said, they're doing this for your own good. And if you are afraid, I just want you to remember that you are not alone. The Lord is with you.
Mm.
And that's all I said to him.
Mhm.
So I come back the next morning with my mom after staying in the hotel that night, and my dad, still not able to talk. He wasn't articulate at all. He's sitting there on the edge of the bed and he's going like this,
Mm.
with his hand raised up to the sky like this. And I'm thinking, like, what has happened here,
Mm.
And he couldn't talk, but he had this radiant smile on his face. And the chaplain came into the room to invite everybody to the church service because it was Sunday morning. But the chaplain was a Black man. And my father had, when he was in the military, had developed a very racist attitude towards Black people. And I was worried what he was going to say to this chaplain. Or, he couldn't speak, but I was worried how he was going to behave. The
Yeah.
chaplain came into the room and the chaplain said, "Come on, let's all go to the church service and let's hear the word of the Lord." And my dad's like grabbing my arm, like, "Let's go, let's go."
Wow.
So I was so shocked. So I took him and his little stand, the rolly stand with the IV on it and all the wires, and off we go to the chapel. We sit there, listen to this guy preaching, and when we're singing the hymns, the tears are just rolling down my dad's cheeks. He can't sing, but he's listening to hymns, and the tears are just rolling. And
Yeah.
then the pastor's teaching, and his eyes are so alert. He's just like listening to every single word. And then at the end of the message, the pastor says, we're going to do communion now. And if you want to, you can come up to the communion rail. But if you're got a lot of gear with you, you can sit in the pew and we'll bring communion to you. And I turned to my dad and I said, it's okay. We can stay here. And he looked at me and he said, just as clear as a bell, "No, I want to go up there." So,
Wow.
so we rolled him up to the front. We're kneeling at the altar. They hand him the communion elements and he looks to me and he says, "You don't know how many years I've been waiting for this." Now, all those years, I thought he was hostile and unwilling to listen and all of that. The battle was going on inside of him, right?
Yeah.
So I've often thought, and it was my experience too when I was a missionary in Japan, that people that are most hostile are generally much closer to the kingdom because the hostility arises out of their battle that they're going on inside themselves.
Yeah.
So so he took communion with great joy. We
Wow.
went back to the room and then we went out to lunch at the cafe in the hospital. We're sitting in the cafe area. He's verbal. He's talking. And this
Mm.
couple comes over and sits down with us, and their ministry was to go to the VA hospital and talk to people. So they
Yeah.
just had a ministry of doing that. So they sat down at the table with us and they said, "Would you like to tell us your story?" And my dad starts telling his whole life story to these people and talking about his pride and how his pride had always kept him from hearing the truth about Jesus. But that in the night, that night before, he had had a blazing vision of the entire construction of the universe and of Jesus and how it all went down,
Yeah.
the whole thing. He could see the whole thing.
Yeah. How it all
And he
works.
knew
Yeah.
that Jesus was the savior of the world.
Mm.
And
That's beautiful. That's, I mean,
now that he stopped talking after that, he didn't really talk again much, a little
yeah.
bit maybe. Later in the week, my pastor from my church, he had asked if he could talk to my pastor. So my pastor went to the hospital and sat with him. And he told the pastor things about his life that I had never known. How when he was 4 years old, his mother had abandoned them for a week and he thought she was going to be gone forever.
Mm.
And how that had affected him and
Yeah.
made him feel like he just wasn't worthy and that it must have been his fault.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things that I never knew about him had affected him his whole life.
Wow.
And he talked about how he regretted the kind of husband and father he'd been. And then so anyway, afterwards, the pastor told me some of these things. And then he said, Karen, he said, "I'm very confident that your dad is in the Lord now because I've never heard the name of Jesus used so tenderly
Mm-hmm.
as your dad when he spoke it to me."
Mm-hmm.
So a few days later, he was home from the hospital. It was Thanksgiving. we couldn't have much of a meal because my mother had intestinal cancer and couldn't really eat anything because the colon cancer was just eating up her insides. But I had
Yeah.
fixed a little bit of something for my dad, and we're sitting there at our little table. And my dad said, "Can I pray?" And in his prayer was just, "Jesus, have mercy on us." And about a week after that, my mother passed away, and maybe it was 10 days. I thought she was doing better, and I was still going in to teach at the university. I would go on Monday and stay through until Friday and then come back. And that was a short week because it was Christmas vacation. So it was Monday through Wednesday. So I thought I can go back for those 3 days because that's finals. I need to take, give everybody their finals. I need to be the responsible citizen.
Yeah.
And I was staying with a friend there. And that Tuesday night, I got a call that my mother had been rushed to the hospital because
Mm.
the hospice care just wasn't enough for her at that point. And I made the calculated decision to wait until the next day after the last final, which was over at 11 in the morning. I thought, well, I can stay this one more night and uphold my responsibility, and then I'll go back and be with mom. But by the time I got to the hospital, she was comatose. And
Mm.
so I never got to say goodbye to her. But I was with her when she died.
Yeah.
And I clearly remember it was a Sunday morning, and the I was watching some sort of Christian thing on TV, and there was a testimony by a young man. And at the end of the testimony, he gave a quote from, I think, John Stott. I think it was John Stott who said this, that in this world of sin and sorrow and pain, I could not believe in a savior who had not experienced it for himself. And I was just contemplating that, and just for a moment I drifted off. And when I awoke, my mom was gone.
Mm.
And and it was at 10:20 in the morning. And then the pastor later told me that at 10:20 they had been praying that my mom would be able to go home and be with the Lord.
Yeah.
She had just become a Christian a couple of years before.
Wow.
And so uh, during the next 4 weeks, my dad's health went down, but he was at home with me and I was taking care of him because I was home on this vacation. And eventually I had to have him hospitalized, and I stayed with him the entire time, except that at one point, some of the people from the church said, "Karen, you haven't eaten, you haven't taken a shower, you haven't slept, at least you have to go and get yourself something to eat." And so one of the elders from the church was sitting with my dad, and I left to get something to eat. When I came back, he was gone.
Mm.
So I had regrets for a long time afterwards that I had not been there that night my mother went in the hospital, when she was still alert to know that I was there with her. I had so many regrets.
Mm.
I did battle with that for a long time. But I mean, at the same time, I was grieving the loss of my husband,
Yeah.
and dealing with my father's illness. And there were just so many, there were so many things all at once.
Yeah.
But still, I was upset with myself that I hadn't, because the reasons that we do things, my reason was just, I want to appear to be a responsible person and complete my responsibilities. But someone else could have administered that stupid test. It didn't have to be me. But
You
um,
also you just don't know. At life is like poker. It's not a complete information game.
yeah,
You have to make the best decision you can with the information you have at the time. And I know that doesn't help, but I'm saying I also just because of my own experience and personal feelings think that that they may be comatose, but they're not gone. They're not.
Mhm.
You're. I don't believe that your spirit leaves before you die. I just don't believe
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And we experience. I mean, in Christianity, you experience many things that are beyond language,
Mhm.
and I don't think that I mean, because I have thought about this with my own father too, just like not being able to have a conversation with him
Mhm.
doesn't mean that he didn't know that I wasn't there or that I was there.
Mhm.
I still believe that. I still believe that he was there. It's just he was incapable of responding.
Mhm.
But he was there until the end. I just that's just my personal belief system. I know different people look at it differently and have different feelings, but that's just my own. I just believe that when you're conceived, that's when your soul comes in, and when you die, that's when your soul leaves. And
Mhm. Well, I mean, they've done a lot of research about people's, well, and just the anecdotal stories of people who have come out of comas and
yeah,
knew everything that was being said in the room when they were there, and
yeah,
they could clearly hear it, understand it, process it, and everything, but they were still comatose. So
yeah.
yeah, there are
Um,
things that are way beyond our understanding.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I didn't know a lot back in those days. If I had known more, I would have been reading scripture to her or
Mm,
singing or something. I think
yeah.
mostly I probably just sat with her. Um,
Well, that has a special healing power in itself,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Well, and what I was thinking about, one thing that went through my mind as you were sharing your beautiful story, thank you for being so open, um, was the grace that was being poured on you as you were caring for two parents that are on their way out, going to opposite ends, in opposite directions to go to work and to go to the VA hospital and to care for your mother. And I, to be able to carry a full-time job while caring for your parents, that's just, I mean, the only word I can think of is miraculous. To think that, I know as difficult and as challenging as it was, I have to believe that there was an enormous amount of grace that was being poured on you to even make it so that you could go without eating and without sleeping and without showering and
Yeah.
driving, and and just the emotional strain of being the primary caregiver for your parents as they reach the end of their lives is just so difficult.
Well,
And
certainly, I mean, that was the time that solidified in my heart that Jesus Christ is real
yeah,
and he loves us because without his power working through me, I just don't understand what people do who don't have that relationship when they face really difficult circumstances like that because I knew that he was in my life and that he would be my strength and my courage and my helper and my friend through all of this. That gave me the ability to be at peace, the ability to sleep at night even, and the ability to take care of my responsibilities and all of those things. I think if I had been the person that I was 10 years prior to that, before I knew the Lord, I would have just been frantic,
mhm,
racing around trying to accomplish everything in my own strength, exhausted all the time because I was trying to be the one who could handle things by myself.
yeah,
But I had learned to allow other people from the body to come alongside and minister to me and help me. And I had stopped trying to be everything on my own. And so that just made a huge difference. I mean, I just don't know how I would have gotten through it otherwise
that,
because
I believe that.
um, I had a brother, but my brother couldn't be there to help because he had died 2 years previously in a plane crash, and uh,
Wow.
and just going through the trying to understand what that was all about. He was 5 years older than me, so I was 40 at the time that he I was 38 at the time that he died in the plane crash,
Mm.
and he was 43. And and there again, I had so many regrets because I had just gone to Japan as a missionary, and I was in Japan, and my husband and I had contemplated stopping in Alaska on the way because my brother lived in Alaska. He had moved to Alaska like 10 years before. I'd never been to Alaska to see him because it was expensive back in those days to go
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know him all that well. He had a wife and two kids, and they had gone up to Alaska fairly early in their marriage. And he had built a log house by himself, a three
Wow.
bedroom, two bath log house, chopped down every tree, peeled the bark, laid the logs. He did everything in that log house by himself except the stringer across the top, that big long
Hmm.
40-foot log had to be brought in by a crane, but otherwise he did everything else by himself. And
Wow.
I should have gone there and seen his log house and celebrated what he had accomplished and all of that. And I had had many conversations with him whenever he was in the States, trying to talk with him about the Lord, but he was not willing to listen,
Hmm.
not willing to have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And and I could have at least celebrated him by going there to visit, but I never did. And
Mm.
then he died, and he died 3 months after I got to Alaska. So I had all those regrets. And I think one of the toughest things in my life is trying to figure out what to do with regrets. You know, I mean, part of it is you have a regret, you know, it's not right to have regrets. And so you can try to forget the regrets, push them aside, or try to talk to the Lord to find healing for the regrets. But I just think regrets are this big pile of, is like Jordan Peterson says, there's a pile of snakes there. What do you
Yeah.
do with that pile of snakes? And regrets are like that.
Yeah. It's hard. I have to. There's a couple of things that a couple of ways I look at it that help me not get overwhelmed with despair um, over the past. And one is I am right. I'm here because of where I've been,
Yeah.
and I'm grateful for where I am because, and I know God has carried me the whole time. I know He was patient with me and my rebellion and my rejection, and didn't give up on me, and has had the patience and love to bring me back into His, into His love and into an awareness of His love, and my healing my family as well. And I just I think, oh man, why didn't I do that when I was 20? And it's like, well, I had the opportunity, and I rejected it over and over and over. I was Adam standing at the tree going, well, we're in the world, let's do the world thing. And so it happened when it needed to. It happened when I was ready, and now, I have some regret over some things I've said to family and influence I've had on family members. As far as how ardently anti-Christian and anti-religious I was when I was younger, and said some very stupid things. I mean, I told my 5-year-old daughter that unicorns weren't real because no one had seen them, and she's just like, it just crushed her whole worldview. And I've been living with the regret of that ever since. And then, especially when I started learning about identity and about how bodies can have more than one member, and that the Santa Claus exists because you know what he looks like. And if you see somebody dressed like Santa Claus, you know that's Santa Claus. And if you walk up to him and he says ho ho ho, you know you're talking to Santa Claus. And I didn't understand any of that, you know. And so I did very stupid things. Like I said, I broke my 5-year-old daughter's heart, and it still influences her worldview to this day. She's 14 now, you know. And but I have this hope that's just a seed has been planted that's just starting to grow, that God's work is to turn death to glory.
Mm.
And I may have killed a part of my daughter's worldview on that day, but God hasn't stopped working
Mhm.
in her life or in mine.
Mhm.
And I am learning to be patient with the way he moves in the lives of our loved ones and in ourselves, you know. And it's allowed me to take some of the pressure off, because I was like you, where I was very I was I was shown by my environment at a very early age that I needed to fend for myself and that I was on my own from a very early age.
Mhm.
And I took that to heart and took too much responsibility for everything. And like you, was very anxious and frantic and very forgetful because of how anxious I was. Like, I thought I had ADHD, and I still think I have a little bit of it, but mostly it was anxiety. I lived with extreme anxiety for most of my life. And I wasn't even aware of it until someone said, you know, that's not normal to feel that way. You know, like, you don't have to feel that way. And I was like, feel what way? You know? So, but I wouldn't remember to put the trash out on trash day. I wouldn't, you know, I would forget my keys. I would forget my wallet. I would forget to take my computer to work. I would, you know, all these things, because I just was always just, my mind was always racing.
Mhm.
And since, you know, I mean, be, when I started being exposed to Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Peugeot, and being exposed to this different way of seeing the world, and then starting to go to church, everything has slowed way down. And this pressure has been lifted from my shoulders. You know, my yoke is light. I believe that. I have felt that. I have experienced that burden that I put on myself to handle the world on my own and to understand it and predict it. That's all just melting away rapidly as I grow in Christ and learn to trust in his plan for me, and to rely on him, and to acknowledge my reliance on him, is what it really comes down to.
Mhm.
Because you know, I was always reliant on him for everything. That's the way this works. That's the way the universe, that's what holds it together.
Mhm.
But I wasn't, I not only wasn't aware of that, I was, you know, I took all of that on myself. And now I'm just,
Mhm.
I find being a Christian very freeing. I find it very, I don't want to say the word liberating because of all the connotations that come with that word, but um, I don't I don't feel any sense of loss over any kind of sacrifice I make to say more prayers or to go to church. You know, we have services during the week as well that we can attend, prayers and stuff like that. And and I try to go to every one I can, and it's like it's a joy. It brings me comfort. It brings me peace. It makes my life feel better. Makes my life easier. Makes it's like, why wouldn't I go? This is the most effective medicine I've ever found in my life. Why wouldn't I want to partake of that? You know,
Mhm.
and all of those experiences have really helped ease the burden that I took of taking responsibility for screwing up and for being a jerk to my family and to my friends. And I can, I have seen the power of God to heal my own heart. And now I try to put a lot of time and attention into praying for those that I may have damaged. And some of that is also, I've also learned that I'm probably putting too much weight on things I said. And
Mhm.
it's not just me. And they have their free will and they make their own decisions.
Mhm.
I may have been an influence, but I'm not the cause.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that that's a super important element because every person has their own personality and their own way of reacting to things and the things that they remember.
Yes.
You know, some people may not even remember the things that you said, and other people, you may have said something wonderful to them, but they remember it as something horrible. And so you never know what impact you're having, which is why I saw some little clip today online of Alistair Begg. I don't know if you've ever heard him teach. Anyway, he was saying, he was kind of riffing on the idea of what happens when you get at the gate of heaven and they say, you know, why should we let you in? He said, anything that starts with I, you're not. The only thing that you can say when you get to the gate of heaven is Jesus Christ and him crucified. You
Yeah.
know, that's
Yeah.
um but what you made me think about when I was reflecting on regrets while you were talking there, and I really love what you said, that we are here because we were there.
Yeah.
And that path is a path that we have to go through. And who knows how God uses all of those mistakes and failures and failings and losses and wrongs that we committed, and all, he uses that somehow in building what we are now. And
Yes. Yeah.
but it did remind me that maybe 6 months to a year, 6 months after all that happened, I was in Michigan visiting a friend, and she took me to a little church that was meeting in a gymnasium in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it was a great church service. And after the church service, this older woman came up to me and she said, Karen. And I looked at her and I sort of recognized her, because something happens when you go through a lot of trauma. You sort of forget things. And
Yeah.
I had known her 4 years before when I was at a missionary internship program in the Detroit area. She and her husband were leaders in the missionary internship program, helping to prepare missionaries to go overseas. And she took one look at me and she said, looks like you need a hug. And,
Mm.
you know, inside I'm thinking, I'm fine, you know, but she put her arms around me to hug me. And I just started sobbing. I mean, it's just coming out of me. And
Yeah.
she said, Karen, you need to come and visit me tomorrow. Well, it turned out she still lived in Detroit. How did she happen to be in this tiny little church in Ann Arbor, Michigan, on the exact day that I was there? She didn't go to that church ordinarily. She was just there visiting for some reason that morning and saw me.
Mm.
So I went to her house the next day in Detroit, and she told me her story, which was amazing. That's for another time. But she had been a missionary for 25 years and had gone through a lot of stuff, and had discovered the power of a listening ear.
Mm.
And she
Yeah.
said, I want you to tell me your story and I will just listen. Nobody had ever done that for me before.
Mm.
I talked for 5 hours.
Mm.
I talked about all these regrets, things that I hadn't even dared to say out loud. I mean, one of the things that I'd struggled with during my father's last illness, because I had no idea how long he was going to live. He didn't seem very bad at the beginning of that month,
Mhm.
and my mother had passed away. And I'm having all these thoughts go through my head. Here I am, my brother's gone, I'm alone, my husband has left me, I'm alone. Why did it have to be my mother that died first? I had a great relationship with her. I loved her so much. She died. And now here's my father. I don't even know him. I don't have any sort of relationship with him. I'm going to be, and these negative thoughts were like, I'm going to be stuck taking care of him for the rest of my life. And then I would go like, oh, where did that thought come from? I hate that thought. I don't want to have that thought. And then
Mm.
that would kind of roll around in there, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was afraid to even say those things out loud, even to my pastor or any of my friends, because I thought, to even have a thought like that makes you such an evil, wretched person.
Mm.
But she listened to me for 5 hours and she listened to me pour this out. And she didn't only listen. When sometimes when I'd say something, she would say, well, that would have made me very angry, or I would have been so hurt by that. So she sort of put emotions onto the things I was saying that I didn't even know I had been experiencing. I had tamped everything down
Mm.
so much that
Hmm.
all that was there was just a kind of a deadness.
Yeah.
But she got me talking about all the regrets and all of those things, and then we prayed, and it was like a revelation. It's like you say, it's like this weight just lifts off of you, and all of a sudden you're at rest. And
Yeah.
yeah, she really made my path forward much more doable because she was willing to listen,
Wow.
and listen without judgment, listen without
Mm.
criticism.
Yeah. Or advice even.
Yeah, or even advice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say that's one area that I really am grateful for in Orthodoxy. And it's so foreign to our modern world and our modern mind. But um, our parish, our priests really, they're very traditional. They're very rooted in the traditions of Orthodoxy, and they encourage frequent confession, um, like at least once a month is what we're encouraged to do
Hmm.
in order to receive Eucharist properly. And the it's it's a unique conversation. You can't have that conversation in any other context where you stand in the Orthodox Church, you stand in front of the icons to remind you of the presence of God with you all the time. Next, and the priest is standing next to you listening. And you are searching your soul for the places where you are falling short as a servant of God and as someone who's seeking for him, believes him, loves him, but is weak and has old habits and patterns that build up and
Hmm.
ossify. And the act of sharing those deepest, darkest parts of yourself, like you're talking about, the whole time you were talking, I was like, that just sounds like confession. So like right before you're baptized into the Orthodox Church, you do a life confession where you sit with the priest and you have the same experience, but you're going through everything. And they give you a questionnaire, and it's like 3 pages of questions,
Hmm.
single spaced. I mean,
It's a real
this is
deal.
it's an intense inventory. It's
Uh-huh.
very unpleasant, but you bring that to the altar of sacrifice. You bring that to
Hmm.
the altar and you say, I these are the things I've done, and I can't process them alone. I can't. I'm carrying this and I don't know what to do with it. It's like you said, those snakes, it's that regret. That's what you bring to confession.
Hmm.
And your your spiritual father is praying the whole time that you're confessing. He's saying the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on us. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on us. He's saying that over and over. Like they have their prayer ropes with them and they're praying the whole time that you're confessing. And then when you say, that's all I can think of right now, again because I'm inattentive and I'm sure there are sins that I didn't I don't remember, then your spiritual father shares some counsel for you that will help. For me, it's just been the experience of putting it into context and helping you kind of readjust and rebalance and
Hmm.
recommit and reprioritize. And it's always very loving. It's very um, there's always a spirit of love. And then they say a prayer and they say, I cannot forgive any sin, but you know I pray that God will forgive your sins this day. And there's a longer prayer, and I don't know it very well, but I've heard it a few times now. And it is exactly what you're talking about. It's that it's been almost completely lost in Protestantism. The
Mhm.
art the sacrament of confession. It's considered a sacrament in
Mhm.
in the Orthodox Church, and I understand now the because it is such a unique experience to have someone who will be there in a complete spirit of love and with the only desire to help you, and there's nothing that they haven't already heard. You're
Mhm.
not going to shock the priest. You just can't. They've already heard it,
Mhm.
and God already knows. So
Yeah.
it's just the act of reconciling yourself to your weaknesses and
Mm.
accepting them and then turning them over that is so freeing. And it's one of the things that I'm most grateful for finding in Orthodoxy. In Mormonism, there is a similar act where if you do something serious, you go talk to the bishop, and it's usually more question answer probing kind of conversation where they're
Mhm.
really trying to get the details of what happened. It's a much more of an exchange that rather than just a confession in front of someone. And but it gets I got locked, and this is just my own weakness. But I got locked in the I feel guilt, I confess, I get a relief, and then I mean it's almost prideful where you put too much pressure on yourself and you feel so anxious and you feel so terrible. It was an act of, like, I would get in very deep despair and
Mhm.
then go to the bishop and he would relieve this despair, and it was a very unhealthy cycle that actually kind of was a self-perpetuating cycle
Mhm.
because
Yeah,
of
I can see
it's
that.
like an addiction almost. It really
Yeah.
is. And this format of confession seems to work much better with my personality, my makeup, because
Mhm.
their whole job is to keep you from despairing. And the reason that you frequently confess is to keep you from doing the kinds of things that would lead you to feeling deep despair,
Yeah.
because you're thinking, okay, in another 2 weeks, I'm going to be meeting with
Well,
Father
I mean,
Paul.
it sounds as though, and we're going to have to tie it up pretty quick here, but
Yeah,
it
no, I
sounds
understand.
as though what's happening is that they're saying, yes, you've done these things, but Christ,
Yes, exactly. And they
and
say, of course you fall.
yeah,
Of course you're going to fall. You're human. If you have no capability other than the grace of God that's given to you. Actually, that's like orthodoxy's kind of like no, it's no self-esteem. Your whole job is to kill. You should be crucifying yourself every
well,
day
I
for
I
Christ.
remember I remember a friend years ago who was very wise Bible teacher, and I had called her and told her something I was struggling with, and I said, I'm so frustrated because I should be better. And she said, who do you think you are?
Yes, that's it. Yes,
Yes,
it is.
exactly.
It's very prideful, and that's
Yeah.
orthodoxy snapped me out of that.
Yeah.
My priest is like, of course you're going to fall. Of course you're going to make mistakes. The
Yeah.
whole act of orthodoxy is to get up again, and
Yeah.
you're
Well,
going to
that's
be.
the
You
whole
missed prayer tonight. You're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to pray. That's what
that's the
you
whole
do.
message of the scripture is but God. But
Yes,
God. Yeah.
exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
Amen. Well, this has been amazing, Jeremy. I thank you so much for your authenticity and your openness. And I pray that that there are those listening who have gone through a difficult death or who might be facing death that will find some comfort and some hopefully some connection with the Lord through hearing this. So thank you.
I I hope so too, and I am grateful for the opportunity we've had to talk. I was very moved by your experience, the story of hearing your father being relieved of the walls
Hmm.
so that so that the light could come into his soul.
Mhm.
That's a beautiful image. That's just
Well, I was also
that's going to
blessed.
stick with me for the rest of my life.
I was
So
also blessed by
thank you.
your celebration of your father's zest for life. You know, he had a zest for life. So
Definitely. He
thank
definitely
you.
had that. He worked a full day one time. He worked a 10-hour day, got in the car, drove 4 hours to Salt Lake to a Frank Zappa concert, went to the Frank Zappa concert, and then got in the car and drove all the way back and was back in time, just in time to get in his truck and drive back to work.
Wow.
That's
Yeah,
the kind of guy my dad was. That was him. He when there was something that was cool or sounded fun,
he
he
was
was
going to
all
be
in.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we went snowboarding. He for his 50th birthday, we went snowboarding together. So he was a special man.
I'm glad that we have memories of our parents. So,
Yeah.
well, I got to go, but this has
Yes, I
been
understand. Thank you.
fantastic. And
This has been a great talk.
only
Thank you.
only because my husband and I have a date tonight, and
Oh, good. Have fun.
it's a 30-minute drive from here to where we are, and it's a 7 o'clock reservation, and they have
You
live
got to get
music.
going.
They have
Okay,
live
great.
music, so yeah,
Oh,
I gotta
that's
go.
exciting.
It's not
Okay,
Frank
thank you very
Zappa,
much.
not Frank Zappa.
Well, too bad. He's not with us anymore. So,
Bye bye.
all right. See you, Karen.